Husband humiliated his pregnant wife before Mistress, but her last words in hospital made him collapse. The golden chandeliers of Le Bernardin, Chicago, cast warm amber light across the mahogany tables, where crystal glasses caught the glow like tiny prisons of light. The restaurant hummed with the soft murmur of Chicago's elite. Lawyers, executives, and old money families who treated $500 dinners as casual Tuesday evenings. At the corner table, Wesley Moore adjusted his Italian silk tie and surveyed his kingdom. At 35, he commanded respect in boardrooms and fear in negotiations. His construction empire had built half of downtown Chicago, and tonight, he wanted everyone to know it. The reservation had been in his name for weeks, not for his wife, but for the woman who now sat beside him, laughing at something their mutual friend had just whispered. Clara Weston, 26 and stunning in the way that money could perfect, wore a dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her auburn hair fell in calculated waves, and her smile held the kind of confidence that came from knowing she was desired. She leaned into Wesley's shoulder as if she belonged there, as if the golden wedding band on his finger was merely decoration. Across from them, Mia Moore sat with her hands folded over her 6-month belly, watching the performance with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to swallow her pain. At 30, she still carried the gentle beauty that had first caught Wesley's eye in college. But pregnancy had softened her features, made her seem smaller somehow in this world of sharp edges and sharper people. "You know what I love about Clara?" Wesley's voice carried across the table, loud enough for their dinner companions to hear. The Hendersons, the Crafts, the Yellens, all couples who had known Wesley and Mia for years, who had attended their wedding, who now sat in uncomfortable silence as the performance began. Clara's eyes sparkled with anticipation. She knew what was coming. "She gets it," Wesley continued, cutting into his Wagyu steak with theatrical precision. "She understands what it takes to build something real in this city, what it means to have vision." He gestured toward the windows overlooking the Chicago River, where his latest development gleamed against the night sky. "Some people are content to just exist, but Clara sees the bigger picture." Mia's fingers tightened around her water glass. The baby kicked, a small flutter of movement that reminded her why she was here, why she endured this. For him, she told herself, for our son. "Oh, Wesley," Clara laughed, the sound light and musical. "You're too kind. I just believe in supporting the people who inspire me." Her hand found his arm, fingers trailing along his expensive watch. "It's refreshing to be around someone who isn't afraid to dream big." The words hung in the air like smoke. Tom Henderson cleared his throat and reached for his wine, while his wife Margaret suddenly found her salad fascinating. The Crafts exchanged a glance that spoke volumes about the gossip that would follow this dinner. Wesley was emboldened by Clara's praise, by the way she looked at him as if he were the most fascinating man in the room. "That's exactly what I mean," he said, his voice growing warmer. "Clara has this way of seeing potential where others see problems. Take the Riverside project. Most consultants would have called it impossible, but Clara saw what I saw." "What about what I saw?" Mia thought bitterly. She remembered the nights she'd stayed up helping him review contracts, the weekends she'd spent organizing his home office while he was too busy to notice. But those memories felt distant now, like photographs from someone else's life. Clara raised her champagne flute, her engagement ring catching the light. Not the engagement ring Wesley had given her, but a different one that spoke of promises made in shadow. "To new phases of life," she announced, her eyes never leaving Wesley's face, "and to people brave enough to embrace change." The toast was a declaration of war disguised as celebration. Around the table, glasses rose reluctantly, and Mia felt the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment that would follow this evening home. Wesley clinked his glass against Clara's with the sound of breaking glass, though nothing had broken yet. That would come later. "To change," he echoed, and for the first time all evening, his eyes met Mia's across the table. She saw triumph there and cruelty and something else, a desperation that scared her more than his anger ever had. This wasn't just infidelity. This was destruction, deliberate and calculated, designed to humiliate her into disappearing from his life entirely. Mia touched her belly again, feeling their son's small movements beneath her palm. In a few hours, everything would change. But for now, she sat in golden silence, surrounded by the wreckage of her marriage, and waited for the real performance to begin. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing the storm that was coming. The dessert course arrived with theatrical flair, Creme brulee torched tableside while Wesley regaled the table with stories of his latest acquisition. Clara hung on every word, her laughter punctuating his narrative like applause. The other couples had retreated into polite conversation among themselves, creating an invisible barrier around the spectacle unfolding at their end of the table. Mia pushed the untouched chocolate mousse around her plate, her appetite long gone. The baby had been restless all evening, shifting and kicking with unusual intensity. She pressed her palm against her side, trying to ease the discomfort, when a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped softly, her hand flying to her belly. The pain was different from the usual stretching and growing pains she'd grown accustomed to. This felt urgent, wrong. "Wesley," she whispered, leaning toward him. He didn't hear her, or chose not to. He was deep in conversation with Clara about their upcoming business trip to Napa Valley, speaking in code that fooled no one. The pain came again, stronger this time, radiating from her lower back around to her stomach. Mia gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white against the pristine linen. "Wesley," she said again, louder this time. He turned to her with the kind of irritated expression reserved for unwanted interruptions. "What is it, Mia? Can't you see we're talking?" Clara's eyes glittered with amusement at the dismissal. "Is everything all right?" she asked with false concern, her voice dripping with the kind of sympathy that cuts rather than soothes. "I think," Mia began, but another contraction seized her, this one strong enough to make her double over slightly. Several diners at nearby tables glanced over, sensing something was wrong. "I think something's happening with the baby," Mia managed to say through gritted teeth. Wesley's expression shifted from irritation to annoyance. "You're being dramatic," he said, not quite quietly enough. "You've been doing this for months. Every time we're out, suddenly there's some emergency." Margaret Henderson started to rise from her chair. "Mia, honey, are you—" "She's fine," Wesley cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Trust me, I know the signs. She just wants attention." He turned back to Clara, effectively dismissing his wife's distress. "Now, about that vineyard tour." But Mia wasn't listening anymore. The pain was building, coming in waves that left her breathless. She could feel moisture between her legs and knew with terrifying certainty that something was very wrong. Without another word, she pushed back from the table and stood shakily. The movement caused a fresh wave of agony to course through her, and she had to grip the back of her chair to keep from falling. "Where are you going?" Wesley asked, his voice carrying a note of warning. "The bathroom," she whispered. Clara smirked. "Take your time," she said sweetly. "We'll be right here." Mia made it 3 steps toward the restroom before the next contraction brought her to her knees. The pain was overwhelming now, accompanied by a gush of fluid that soaked through her dress onto the restaurant's marble floor. The elegant dining room erupted in concerned murmurs. Waiters rushed over while other patrons pushed back from their tables to give her space. Through the haze of pain, Mia could hear someone calling for an ambulance. "Ma'am, we're going to help you," a voice said. She looked up to see a young waiter, his face etched with genuine worry. "My girlfriend's a nurse. We're going to take care of you." Behind her, she could hear Wesley's voice rising above the commotion. "This is embarrassing," he was saying. "She's always been prone to these episodes. Clara, maybe we should—" "I'm not going anywhere," Clara's voice came back, cool and unbothered. "If she wants to make a scene, that's her choice." The paramedics arrived within minutes, their efficient movements a sharp contrast to the chaos around them. As they lifted Mia onto the stretcher, she caught sight of Wesley still seated at their table, Clara's hand on his arm in what looked like comfort, but felt like possession. "Sir, are you the husband?" one of the paramedics called out. Wesley looked up as if surprised by the question. Yes, but we need you to come with us." Now, for the first time all evening, Wesley looked uncertain. He glanced at Clara, who gave him an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "She always dramatizes," Clara said quietly, but not quietly enough. "This is probably just another false alarm." The paramedic's expression hardened. "Sir, your wife is hemorrhaging. If you're coming, you need to come now." The word hemorrhaging cut through Wesley's fog of selfishness like a blade. For the first time, he saw past his own desires to the reality of what was happening. His wife, the mother of his child, was in genuine danger. As the stretcher disappeared through the restaurant's doors, Wesley stood frozen between 2 choices. Behind him, Clara's perfectly manicured fingers drummed impatiently on the table. Ahead, the ambulance's red lights painted the night in urgent strokes of color. The other diners watched in silence as Wesley Moore faced the first real decision of his adult life, one that would define him either as a man or as something far less. The seconds stretched like hours as he stood there, paralyzed by the weight of consequences he had never bothered to consider. Outside, the ambulance siren began to wail. Wesley arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital 45 minutes after the ambulance. The delay had been Clara's doing. She'd insisted on finishing her wine, on paying the check properly, on maintaining appearances in front of their dinner companions. Every minute had stretched like torture, but Wesley had found himself unable to break free from her influence, even as his conscience screamed at him to run. The emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across worried faces in the waiting area, while the steady beep of monitors created a rhythm of urgency that made Wesley's heart race. The smell of disinfectant and fear hung heavy in the recycled air. "I'm looking for my wife," he told the receptionist, his voice shaking despite his attempts to sound composed. "Mia Moore." She was brought in by ambulance. The woman's fingers flew across her keyboard, her expression professional but kind. "Room 314. She's in surgery right now. The doctor will want to speak with you." Surgery. The word hit Wesley like a physical blow. In all his calculations, in all his selfish justifications for his behavior, he had never imagined real danger. Mia had always been strong, reliable, the steady foundation that allowed him to take risks and chase desires without consequence. He found himself in an uncomfortable plastic chair outside the surgical wing, staring at his hands. They were soft hands, manicured hands that had never known real work despite building an empire. Tonight, they trembled with a fear he couldn't name. "Mr. Moore?" A tired-looking doctor approached, still wearing surgical scrubs. "I'm Dr. Patricia Kane. I've been treating your wife." Wesley stood so quickly the chair scraped against the floor. How is the baby?" Dr. Kane's expression was carefully neutral, the kind of face that delivered both miracles and tragedies with equal professionalism. "Your wife suffered a placental abruption. The placenta separated from the uterine wall, causing severe bleeding. We've managed to stop the hemorrhaging, but she's lost a significant amount of blood." "And the baby?" Wesley's voice cracked on the words. "We had to perform an emergency cesarean. Your son was born at 28 weeks. That's about 3 months premature. He's alive, but he's in the NICU fighting for every breath." "Son." Wesley felt his knees go weak. All these months he'd thought of the pregnancy as an inconvenience, a tie that bound him to a life he was trying to escape. But now, faced with the reality of a tiny human struggling to live, something fundamental shifted inside him. "Can I see him?" "In a moment. First, we need to discuss your wife's condition." Dr. Kane's voice carried a gravity that made Wesley's stomach drop. "The blood loss was severe. We've given her transfusions, but her body has been through tremendous trauma. She's stable, but the next few hours are critical." Wesley nodded numbly, processing information that felt too large for his mind to hold. "This is my fault," he whispered. "Doctor." Kane studied him with eyes that had seen every kind of human breakdown. "Placental abruption can happen for many reasons, Mr. Moore. Stress can be a contributing factor, but—" "I humiliated her tonight," Wesley interrupted, the words pouring out like a confession. "In front of our friends, I chose someone else over her. When she said something was wrong, I told her she was being dramatic." The doctor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Judgment, perhaps, or simple human disappointment. "Your wife is going to need support during her recovery. Whatever happened before, she needs to know she can count on you now." 20 minutes later, Wesley stood in the NICU, staring through the glass at a tiny form connected to more tubes and wires than seemed possible. His son, their son, was barely larger than Wesley's hands, his chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance. "He's a fighter," a nurse said softly beside him. "Born at 2 pounds, 3 ounces. Small, but his vitals are good. Premature babies are tougher than you'd think." Wesley pressed his palm against the glass, imagining he could somehow transfer his strength to the fragile life inside. "What are his chances?" "It's day by day at this stage. The next 72 hours will tell us a lot." 72 hours. 3 days that would determine whether Wesley became a father or attended a funeral he had caused. His phone buzzed. A text from Clara. "How much longer are you going to be? This is getting ridiculous." The words that had seemed reasonable an hour ago now felt obscene. Wesley stared at the screen, then at his son fighting for life in the incubator, then back at the screen. For the first time in months, he saw Clara's true face reflected in her casual dismissal of his family's crisis. He turned off his phone without responding. "Mr. Moore?" Dr. Kane appeared beside him. "Your wife is awake. She's asking for you." The walk to Mia's room felt like a journey across continents. Each step carried the weight of every cruel word he'd spoken. Every moment he'd chosen Clara over his family. Every time he'd dismissed Mia's needs as inconvenience rather than love. Outside room 314, Wesley paused with his hand on the door handle. On the other side lay his wife, pale and weak from blood loss, probably expecting him to make excuses or blame her for ruining his evening. She had every right to hate him, to throw him out, to demand that he never come back. But she had asked for him. Even after everything, she had asked for him. Wesley took a deep breath and pushed open the door, knowing that whatever words passed between them next would either begin his redemption or complete his damnation. The machine monitoring Mia's heartbeat provided the only sound in the room, a steady rhythm that proved she was still fighting, still here, still giving him one last chance to remember who he used to be. The hospital room was bathed in the pale glow of early morning light, filtering through Venetian blinds. Mia lay propped against white pillows, her face so pale it seemed to blend with the starched sheets. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her lips were dry and colorless from blood loss. The IV drip attached to her arm was a constant reminder of how close they had come to losing her. Wesley stepped into the room tentatively, as if approaching a wounded animal that might flee or attack. He had rehearsed words during the long night in the waiting room, but now they all seemed inadequate. Worse than inadequate, they seemed insulting. "Mia," he whispered, his voice hoarse from hours of crying he didn't remember starting. She turned her head slowly, the movement clearly causing her pain. When their eyes met, Wesley saw something that devastated him more than anger or accusations ever could: complete, emotional exhaustion. She looked at him the way one might look at a stranger on the street, with polite distance and no expectation of connection. "How is he?" she asked, her voice barely audible. For a moment, Wesley thought she meant him, and his heart lurched with hope. Then he realized she was asking about their son. Wesley searched for words that wouldn't sound like empty comfort. "He's fighting. Dr. Kane says the next few days are critical, but his vitals are good." Mia nodded slowly, as if filing away information she would need later. 2 pounds, 2 pounds, 3 ounces. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but her expression didn't change. "I wanted to carry him full term. I wanted to give him every chance." "Mia, this isn't your fault, isn't it?" She turned to look at him directly for the first time, and Wesley saw the full weight of her pain. "I stayed at that dinner knowing I was bleeding. I didn't leave when you humiliated me in front of our friends. I kept trying to get your attention instead of calling for help myself." Wesley felt something crack inside his chest. "You were trying to tell me. I should have listened." "Yes," she said simply. "You should have." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Wesley moved closer to her bed, desperate to bridge the distance, but Mia's eyes stopped him. "She texted you, didn't she?" Mia asked. "While our son was fighting for his life, Clara texted you." Wesley's hand moved instinctively to his pocket, where his turned-off phone held Clara's impatient messages. "How did you?" "Because I know her, and I know you." Mia's voice was steady now, gaining strength from somewhere deep inside. "She doesn't understand why you're wasting time here when you could be with her, and you're torn because part of you agrees." The accuracy of her words hit Wesley like a physical blow. Even in his panic and fear, even watching his son struggle for breath, he had felt Clara's pull, the comfortable selfishness of their relationship calling him back to easier choices. "Mia, please, let me finish." She struggled to sit up straighter, wincing with pain. "I need to say this while I still can." Wesley wanted to help her, to adjust her pillows or call for a nurse, but something in her posture warned him not to move. "You humiliated me tonight," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You paraded your mistress in front of our friends like I was already dead. You told me I was being dramatic when our son was dying inside me. You chose her comfort over my life." Each word was a precise cut, delivered with surgical accuracy. Wesley felt himself bleeding from wounds he had never known he carried. "But you know what hurts the most?" Mia continued. "It's not the cheating. It's not the lies. It's that you robbed our son of the father he deserved." Wesley's knees buckled and he gripped the bedside rail for support. "I can change. I can be better." Mia's laugh was hollow, empty of any warmth. For how long, Wesley? Until Clara gets bored waiting? Until the next young woman tells you how brilliant and powerful you are? This is different. Seeing him in there, seeing what I almost lost, you did lose it. Mia's words cut through his protests like a blade. You lost me the moment you chose her over your family. You lost your son the moment you decided your desires mattered more than his welfare. And you lost yourself somewhere along the way, though I don't think you've figured that out yet. Wesley reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. I want you to listen carefully, Mia said, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a final verdict. If you want any hope of redemption, not with me because that door is closed forever, but for yourself, for our son, you need to understand something. She paused, gathering strength for what came next. The baby that's fighting for his life in that NICU didn't choose you as a father. I chose you. And that was the worst choice of my life. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had burned everything to ash. But he's innocent in all this. He's the only innocent one. Wesley felt tears streaming down his face, but Mia wasn't finished. If you want to be worth anything, if you want to be the man I once believed you were, you'll find a way to deserve him. Not me. Never me again. But him. Because he's going to need a father who can look at him without seeing the reminder of the worst night of his life. The heart monitor began beeping faster, as Mia's emotional exertion took its toll. She was getting paler if that was possible, and her breathing was becoming labored. I'm tired now, she whispered, turning her head away from him. I need you to leave. Mia, please. The word was barely audible. Just go. Wesley stood frozen, watching the woman he had destroyed asking him to disappear from her life. Everything he had built, his marriage, his family, his image of himself as a good man, lay in ruins around him. A nurse appeared in the doorway, having noticed the change in Mia's vital signs. Sir, I need to ask you to step out. Mrs. Moore needs rest. As Wesley walked toward the door, Mia spoke one last time, her voice so quiet he almost missed it. When you see Clara again, tell her she won, but ask her what exactly she won. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. In the hallway, Wesley slumped against the wall and finally understood the difference between winning and destroying everything in the process. Mia's words echoed in his mind, each one a nail in the coffin of the man he used to be. Down the hall, their son continued fighting for breath, unaware that his father had just been sentenced to spend the rest of his life trying to become worthy of him. Wesley sat in his BMW in the hospital parking garage for 2 hours, staring at the concrete wall in front of him. The luxury car felt like a tomb. Leather seats that once symbolized success now seemed to mock him with their emptiness. His phone had been buzzing relentlessly since dawn, Clara's messages growing increasingly impatient. Where are you? This is ridiculous. I'm at your apartment. We need to talk. Wesley, you're being dramatic. Come home. If you don't answer me, I'm leaving. Each message felt like an intrusion from a different world. One where his son wasn't fighting for life, where his wife hadn't just delivered the most devastating verdict of his existence. Wesley finally turned on the engine and drove home, not because Clara demanded it, but because he needed to see her face when he told her what exactly she had won. The penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan had been Wesley's pride, floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian marble, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Clara had been instrumental in decorating it, replacing Mia's warm touches with sleek, cold elegance that impressed visitors but never felt like home. He found her in the living room wearing one of his dress shirts and nothing else, perfectly arranged on the white leather sofa with her coffee and croissant from the bakery downstairs. She looked up from her phone with the expression of someone who had been kept waiting by inferior people. Finally, she said, not looking up from scrolling through social media. Do you know I've been here since 6 a.m.? Margaret Henderson already posted photos from last night on Instagram. The whole thing looks so tacky now because of that scene Mia made. Wesley stood in the doorway, seeing Clara clearly for the first time in months. She was beautiful, undeniably, but it was the kind of beauty that existed only on surfaces. Perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect curves, all hiding something fundamentally hollow underneath. She almost died, Wesley said quietly. Clara waved her hand dismissively. She's fine, obviously, or you wouldn't be here. Did you get her to agree to the divorce terms? This is actually perfect timing. She'll be grateful for any settlement that covers medical bills. The casual cruelty of the words hit Wesley like ice water. She had emergency surgery. Our son was born 3 months early. Son? Clara looked up for the first time, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drawing together. I thought you didn't know the gender. 2 pounds, 3 ounces. He might not survive. For a moment, something flickered across Clara's face. Not quite sympathy, but perhaps an awareness that she should perform it. That's unfortunate. But these things happen, Wesley. The important thing is that now you're free to make a clean start. Wesley felt something snap inside him like a cable stretched beyond its breaking point. Free? Well, yes. Clara stood, moving toward him with the confident grace of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. I know this seems tragic now, but in a way it solves a lot of problems. You won't have to deal with custody arrangements or child support. We can start fresh, just the two of us. She reached for him, her manicured fingers trailing along his jacket, but Wesley stepped back as if she were radioactive. You think my son dying would be convenient? He said, the words barely audible. Clara's expression shifted, sensing danger but not understanding its source. I'm being practical, Wesley. You always said you admired that about me. You said I was realistic while Mia lived in fantasies. What fantasies? You know, thinking you actually wanted to be tied down with babies and mortgages and all that suburban mediocrity. I saved you from that. Wesley looked around the apartment. The cold marble, the pristine surfaces that showed no evidence of life actually being lived there. This is what you saved me for? This emptiness? Clara's perfect composure cracked slightly. This is success, Wesley. This is what winners look like. Not sitting in some suburban house changing diapers and arguing about grocery bills. My wife nearly bled to death because I ignored her when she needed help. Your wife made a scene because she couldn't handle sharing you with someone better. Clara's voice took on an edge that Wesley had heard before but never recognized as cruelty. She played the victim card perfectly, I'll give her that. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Wesley saw himself as if from outside his body, a man who had traded everything real for something that wasn't even fake, just empty. She told me to give you a message, Wesley said slowly. Clara's eyes lit up with interest. Oh, is she finally ready to discuss terms? She said to tell you that you won, but she wants to know what exactly you won. Clara laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. I won you, obviously. I won the better life, the successful man, the apartment, the lifestyle. I won everything she was too boring to appreciate. Wesley nodded slowly, finally understanding. You won a man who abandoned his wife and child. You won someone who chose convenience over love, who picked status over substance. You won a coward. Clara's smile faltered. What are you saying? I'm saying Mia was right. You did win. You won exactly the kind of man who would do what I did. Congratulations. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Clara's perfect facade began to crumble as she realized the trophy she'd fought for was turning to ash in her hands. You're upset, she said carefully. You're not thinking clearly. When this crisis passes, there is no crisis passing, Clara. There's just me, finally seeing what I really am. Wesley walked to the window overlooking the lake, where he'd once felt like a king surveying his domain. Now the view looked cold and distant, beautiful but unreachable. My son is fighting for his life, he said without turning around. My wife, my extraordinary, loyal, loving wife, just told me I was the worst choice she ever made, and the woman I destroyed my family for is celebrating because it's convenient. He turned to face Clara, who was staring at him with growing alarm. I need you to leave, he said. Wesley, you're being irrational. I need you to pack your things and leave. Now. Clara's composure finally shattered completely. You can't be serious. After everything we've been through? After everything I've sacrificed? What did you sacrifice, Clara? What did you actually give up? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it, apparently unable to think of anything substantial. I thought so, Wesley said. You risked nothing and lost nothing because you never had anything real to begin with. As Clara gathered her belongings with the fury of someone accustomed to winning, Wesley sat in the chair where Mia used to read in the evenings. He could almost see her there, book in hand, occasionally reading him interesting passages or laughing at something amusing. Those moments had been real. Everything since then had been performance. Clara slammed the door behind her, leaving Wesley alone with the echo of her heels on marble and the weight of understanding what he had traded away. In the silence, his phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Mr. Moore, please call the NICU when you receive this message. Wesley's hands shook as he dialed, knowing that the next words he heard would either give him a reason to fight for redemption or confirm that he had lost everything that ever mattered. Wesley's hands trembled as he dialed the NICU. Each ring felt like an eternity, and when the nurse finally answered, her voice sounded impossibly far away. Mr. Moore, This is Jennifer from the NICU. We need you to come in immediately. Your son's condition has changed. The words hit him like a physical blow. Changed how? Is he? Dr. Kane will explain everything when you arrive. How quickly can you get here? Wesley was already grabbing his keys. 20 minutes. The drive to Northwestern Memorial passed in a blur of traffic lights and horn honks that barely registered. Wesley's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. In less than 24 hours, he had lost his wife's love, destroyed his relationship with Clara, and now faced the possibility of losing his son, a child he had barely acknowledged, until crisis forced him to confront reality. The NICU felt different this time. The controlled chaos of medical professionals moving with urgent purpose created an atmosphere of barely contained emergency. Wesley found Dr. Kane waiting for him outside the unit, her expression carefully neutral in the way that medical professionals perfected when delivering news that could shatter or heal families. Mr. Moore, thank you for coming so quickly. She gestured toward a small consultation room. Let's sit down. Wesley's legs nearly gave out. Is he alive? Yes, but his condition has deteriorated. He's developed respiratory distress syndrome. His lungs aren't producing enough surfactant to keep the air sacs open. It's common in premature babies, but in his case it's severe. Wesley sank into the plastic chair, feeling the weight of medical terminology he didn't understand but knew was serious. What does that mean? We've put him on a ventilator to help him breathe. The next 48 hours are critical. If his lungs don't respond to treatment, Dr. Kane paused, choosing her words carefully. We need to be prepared for all possibilities. The antiseptic room felt like it was closing in around Wesley. Can I see him? Of course, but I want you to be prepared. He looks very different now with all the additional equipment. Walking to the NICU felt like approaching a judgment. Through the glass partition, Wesley could see his son. Even smaller now, it seemed, dwarfed by the machinery keeping him alive. Tubes and wires covered the tiny body, and the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator provided an artificial breath that should have been natural. He's a fighter, Jennifer, the NICU nurse, said softly beside him. His heart rate is strong and he's been moving his hands. Premature babies are incredibly resilient. Wesley pressed his palm against the glass, watching the mechanical rise and fall of his son's chest. What are his chances? Every hour he survives improves his odds. Dr. Kane is one of the best neonatal specialists in the city. If anyone can help him through this, it's her. For the first time since this nightmare began, Wesley felt the crushing weight of potential loss. This wasn't about his marriage or his mistakes anymore. This was about a tiny human being, fighting for the chance to exist, to take his first real breath, to open his eyes and see the world. Can he hear me? Wesley asked. We think so. Talking to him might help. Wesley had never felt more inadequate. What words could possibly bridge the gap between his failures and this moment of desperate hope? Hey, little guy, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm your dad. I know I haven't been much of one so far, but I'm here now. The baby's hand moved slightly, fingers curling as if grasping for something just out of reach. Your mom, she's the strongest person I know. She fought to bring you here, and now you need to fight to stay, because she's going to need you, and Wesley's voice broke completely. And I need the chance to become the father you deserve. Hours passed. Wesley remained stationed outside the NICU, watching monitors and learning to read the subtle changes in numbers that meant life or death. Nurses came and went, checking systems, adjusting settings, maintaining the delicate balance that kept his son alive. At 3 a.m., Dr. Kane appeared with news. His oxygen levels have improved slightly. It's a small step, but it's in the right direction. Wesley felt tears of relief he didn't know he'd been holding back. Does that mean? It means he's responding to treatment. We're not out of the woods yet, but it's encouraging. As dawn broke over Chicago, Wesley found himself in the hospital chapel, a small, non-denominational room with simple wooden pews and stained glass windows that caught the early morning light. He hadn't prayed since childhood, wasn't even sure he believed in anything beyond what he could see and touch. But sitting in that quiet space, thinking about his son's fight for life and his wife's words about redemption, Wesley found himself whispering promises to anyone who might be listening. I'll be better, he said to the empty room. I'll find a way to deserve them both. Just, please, let him live. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom Henderson. Heard about the baby. How is everyone? Let us know if you need anything. It was the first contact from anyone in their social circle since the disaster at the restaurant. Wesley stared at the message, realizing that while he'd been focused on losing Mia and Clara, He'd also lost the respect of everyone who had witnessed his behavior that night. More messages followed throughout the morning, awkward expressions of concern that danced around the elephant in the room. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one quite knew how to address it. Wesley had become that person, the one whose personal failures had made others uncomfortable, whose presence at future gatherings would create awkward silences and whispered conversations. By noon, the baby's condition had stabilized enough for cautious optimism. Wesley returned to the NICU to find his son's color slightly better. The ventilator settings reduced marginally. "He's improving," Jennifer confirmed. Slowly, but steadily. Wesley allowed himself to feel the first tentative spark of hope. His son was fighting, just as Mia had fought through blood loss and pain to bring him into the world. But as Wesley looked at the tiny warrior in the incubator, he realized that survival was only the first battle. If his son lived, when his son lived, Wesley would have to face the much harder challenge of becoming the man this child deserved as a father. And he would have to do it while earning back the respect of everyone who had watched him destroy his family for selfish desires. The ventilator continued its steady rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat marking time until Wesley could prove whether Mia's faith in redemption had any foundation in reality. 3 weeks had passed since that catastrophic night at Le Bernardin. Wesley's son, whom Mia had named Oliver during one of her brief, monitored visits to the NICU, was slowly gaining weight and breathing with less assistance. The doctors spoke cautiously of progress, of small victories measured in ounces and oxygen levels. But while Oliver fought his battles in the sterile environment of the hospital, Wesley discovered that the real world had become a minefield of judgment and whispered conversations. It started at Millennium Park Coffee, a place Wesley had frequented for years. The barista, a young woman named Sarah who always remembered his order, looked through him as if he were invisible. When he approached the counter, she glanced away and called for her manager. "I think someone else can help you," she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of disappointment usually reserved for convicted criminals. Wesley realized with growing horror that word had spread far beyond their immediate social circle. Chicago's elite community was smaller than most people imagined, and gossip traveled fast among those who cleaned houses, served food, and worked in the service industry that kept the wealthy comfortable. At his office, the atmosphere had shifted as well. His assistant, Linda, who had worked for him for 8 years, maintained professional courtesy, but none of the warm familiarity that had characterized their relationship. She scheduled his meetings with mechanical efficiency and avoided eye contact. "Linda," Wesley said one afternoon, "is everything all right?" She looked up from her computer with the expression of someone who had practiced this conversation. "My daughter is a nurse at Northwestern Memorial, Mr. Moore. She's seen Mrs. Moore visiting the NICU." The words hung between them like an accusation. Wesley understood immediately. Linda knew everything. Knew about the restaurant, the humiliation, the emergency surgery that could have been prevented if he'd listened to his wife. "I see," Wesley said quietly. "She's a lovely woman, Mrs. Moore. Always so kind when she came to company events." Linda's voice carried a weight of judgment that felt heavier than anger. "My daughter says she still asks about you, even after everything." Wesley felt the familiar knife twist of guilt. Even now, even after he'd destroyed everything, Mia was more gracious than he deserved. The isolation grew more pronounced as days passed. At the Chicago Athletic Association, where Wesley had been a member for 15 years, conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Men who had once competed for his attention in business deals now found excuses to cut their interactions short. "Wesley," called out James Kraft, one of the couples from that disastrous dinner. Wesley turned with relief, grateful for acknowledgement, until he saw James's expression. "I wanted you to know that Margaret and I won't be able to make your fundraiser next month," James said, his tone carefully neutral. "Schedule conflict." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The fundraiser Wesley hosted annually for the Chicago Children's Hospital had been a social highlight, drawing the city's most influential donors. Now, James was politely but firmly distancing himself from association with Wesley's tainted reputation. "Of course," Wesley replied, understanding that this was how social death occurred, not with dramatic confrontations, but with polite withdrawals and schedule conflicts. By the 4th week, Wesley had received 17 similar regrets for the fundraiser. Sponsors were pulling out with carefully worded explanations about shifting priorities and budget constraints. The event that had once been oversubscribed was becoming a public embarrassment. The final blow came when his business partner, Richard Yellen, requested a private meeting. Wes, We need to talk about the Morrison project, Richard said, closing the office door behind him. The Morrison project was Wesley's pride, a mixed-use development that would reshape downtown Chicago's skyline. They'd been courting investors for 18 months, and approval had seemed certain. What about it? Richard sat down heavily, looking every one of his 62 years. Morrison's wife was at that dinner, Wesley. She's been telling people what she witnessed. Wesley felt his stomach drop. Mrs. Morrison was Chicago royalty, a woman whose social approval could make or break reputations. If she had turned against him, the family is withdrawing their support, Richard continued. They're citing philosophical differences with our leadership structure. $28 million. Gone, along with the prestige and political connections that came with the Morrison name. Richard, maybe if I talk to them. Wesley, stop. Richard's voice was gentle, but firm. This isn't just about one project. Word is spreading through the investor community. People are questioning our judgment, our stability. They're asking if they want to be associated with a company whose principal partner publicly humiliates his pregnant wife. The words hit Wesley like physical blows. He had always prided himself on keeping his personal and professional lives separate, never imagining that his private failures could destroy everything he'd built. What are you saying? Richard leaned forward, his expression sad rather than angry. I'm saying you need to take a step back. Let me handle the client relationships for a while. Focus on your family, what's left of it. Wesley understood. He was being quietly pushed aside from the company he'd helped build. Not fired, but marginalized, made irrelevant until the scandal died down, or he found a way to rehabilitate his reputation. That evening, Wesley sat in his empty penthouse, surrounded by the expensive symbols of his success. The view of Lake Michigan looked the same, but everything felt different. The silence was oppressive. No Clara's laugh, no Mia's gentle presence, no sounds of life being lived. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his brother Marcus calling from Portland. Wesley, I heard about the baby. How is he? It was the first genuine human warmth Wesley had felt in weeks. Marcus had always been the responsible one, the brother who chose teaching over business, family dinners over networking events. He's getting stronger, Wesley said, his voice breaking slightly. Still in the NICU, but improving. And Mia? Wesley closed his eyes. She doesn't want to see me. Can't say I blame her. There was a long pause before Marcus spoke again. What happened, Wes? Mom heard some things, but Wesley found himself telling the whole story. The affair, the humiliation, the night everything fell apart. Marcus listened without interruption, without judgment, until Wesley finished. Jesus, Wesley, what were you thinking? I wasn't thinking, that's the problem. What are you going to do now? Wesley looked around his empty apartment, considering the question that had haunted him for weeks. I don't know. Try to become someone worthy of being Oliver's father, I guess. Figure out how to live with what I've done. You could start by coming home for a while. Mom and Dad would love to see you, and you could help with Oliver once he's discharged. Mia might appreciate having family support nearby. The suggestion was simple but revolutionary. Leave Chicago, leave the wreckage of his reputation, start over somewhere that didn't know his story. But even as Marcus spoke, Wesley knew it wasn't that simple. I can't run away from this, Marcus. If I'm going to be different, it has to start here, where I made the mess. After hanging up, Wesley walked to the window and looked down at the city lights spreading out below him. Somewhere out there, Mia was probably reading in her apartment, recovering from trauma he had caused. Somewhere else, Clara was likely already moving on to her next target, her next conquest. And in the NICU at Northwestern Memorial, Oliver continued his fight to grow strong enough to go home to a mother who would love him unconditionally, and a father who was still learning what love actually meant. Wesley pressed his palm against the cool glass and made a promise to the city that had watched his fall. He would find a way to earn back not just his son's respect, but his own. Dr. Helena Vasquez's office on North Michigan Avenue was nothing like Wesley had expected. Instead of the sterile, intimidating environment he'd imagined, the space felt warm and lived in. Bookshelves lined with psychology texts mixed with novels, plants in every corner, and two comfortable chairs facing each other, rather than the traditional couch and notepad setup. What brings you here, Mr. Moore? Dr. Vasquez asked, settling into her chair with the calm presence of someone who had heard every story the human heart could tell. Wesley shifted uncomfortably, still unsure how to begin. 3 days earlier, he'd found Dr. Vasquez's name in his insurance directory, After spending hours researching therapists who specialized in infidelity recovery and family trauma, the decision to call had taken him another 2 days. "I destroyed my marriage," he said finally. "I humiliated my wife in public, ignored her when she was having a medical emergency, and chose my mistress over my family. My son almost died because of my selfishness." Dr. Vasquez didn't flinch at the brutal honesty. "That's a significant amount of pain you're carrying. What made you decide to seek help now?" "My wife told me that if I wanted any hope of redemption, it wouldn't be with her. It would be for my son. She said he deserved better than the father I've been." "And what kind of father do you want to be?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Wesley had spent weeks thinking about what he'd lost, what he'd destroyed, what people thought of him. But he'd spent very little time imagining what he could become. "I want to be the kind of man Oliver can be proud of," Wesley said slowly. "I want to be someone who keeps promises, who protects the people he loves instead of hurting them." That's a profound goal. It's also a long journey. Are you prepared for how difficult this process will be? Wesley thought about the empty penthouse, the canceled business deals, the friends who no longer returned his calls. "I think I'm already discovering that." Over the following weeks, Wesley's routine became a careful balance between therapy sessions, daily visits to the NICU, and the slow work of examining the man he'd become. Dr. Vasquez guided him through the painful process of understanding not just what he'd done, but why he'd done it. "Tell me about your parents' marriage," she said during their 4th session. Wesley had been dreading this territory. "My father was successful, built a real estate empire from nothing. My mother supported him, hosted his business dinners, raised the kids while he traveled. How did they treat each other?" Wesley shifted in his chair. "Dad always said Mom was lucky to have him. He provided well, gave her a beautiful home, paid for everything. He said that was what love looked like, a man taking care of his responsibilities. And affection? Emotional intimacy? Dad wasn't big on sentiment. He showed love by working hard, by achieving things. When I started making money, he was prouder than I'd ever seen him." Dr. Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. "So you learned that a man's value comes from what he achieves, not how he treats people." The observation hit Wesley like a physical blow. Yes, I suppose I did." "And Mia challenged that worldview?" Wesley thought about their early years together, when Mia would rather stay home with takeout and a movie than attend another networking event. How she'd valued quiet conversations over grand gestures, small kindnesses over expensive gifts. "She never cared about the money," he said. "She cared about whether I was happy, whether I was kind to people. She used to get upset when I was dismissive to waiters or dismissive to her friends who didn't have money." "How did that make you feel?" "Frustrated, like she didn't understand what it took to succeed, what sacrifices were necessary." "And Clara?" Wesley's stomach clenched. "Clara understood the game. She appreciated what I'd built, never questioned my priorities. She made me feel like a winner. Even when winning required you to lose your integrity." The words hung in the therapy room like smoke. Wesley had never thought of his choices in those terms. But Dr. Vasquez was right. Every step toward Clara had required him to compromise something fundamental about who he claimed to be. Outside of therapy, Wesley's days took on a different rhythm. He arrived at the NICU every morning at 8, spending an hour reading to Oliver from children's books he'd bought in the hospital gift shop. The nurses had told him that premature babies responded to familiar voices, that hearing his parents could help with development. "Today we're reading about a little mouse who gets lost," Wesley would whisper to his son, who now weighed 3 pounds and could breathe on his own for short periods. "But he finds his way home because he follows the sound of his family calling for him." The irony wasn't lost on Wesley that he was reading stories about finding home to a child whose family he'd broken apart. On Thursday mornings, he volunteered at a food bank on the South Side, sorting donations and helping distribute meals. The work was physically demanding and paid nothing, but it was the first time in years that Wesley felt useful without needing recognition or profit. "You're new here," observed Carmen, a 60-year-old grandmother who managed the volunteer schedule. "Yes, ma'am. Just started last week." "What brings you to us? Court-ordered community service?" Wesley could have lied, could have invented a noble motivation. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. "I need to learn how to be a better person. I thought maybe helping people would teach me something about what actually matters." Carmen studied him with eyes that had seen everything life could offer. "Plenty of folks come here feeling guilty about something. Most of them leave once they feel better about themselves. You planning to stick around?" "I hope so. I'm trying to change some fundamental things about who I am." That's honest, at least. We'll see. The work was humbling in ways Wesley hadn't expected. He served meals to families struggling with unemployment, single mothers working 3 jobs, elderly people choosing between medication and groceries. Many of them treated him with kindness despite his obvious inexperience, patiently teaching him how to portion meals properly or stack boxes efficiently. For the first time in his adult life, Wesley was valued not for his wealth or connections, but for his willingness to show up and do necessary work. The breakthrough came during his 6th therapy session, when Dr. Vasquez asked a question that stopped him cold. "Wesley, when was the last time you did something purely because you thought it was right, not because it benefited you in some way?" Wesley sat in silence for nearly 5 minutes, searching his memory for an answer that didn't come. "I can't remember," he finally admitted. "That's a profound realization. For most of your adult life, you've been transactional, weighing every action against what you might gain or lose. What do you think that cost you?" Wesley thought about Mia's face at the restaurant, the way she'd looked at him as if seeing a stranger. "It cost me the ability to love anyone more than I loved myself. And what would it look like to change that?" Wesley looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, where his construction projects still rose toward the sky like monuments to his ambition. "I think it would mean becoming someone I've never been before. Are you ready for that?" Wesley thought about Oliver in the NICU growing stronger every day, about Mia, who was building a new life without him, but who still asked the nurses about his visits, about the possibility that redemption might require him to become a completely different man. "I have to be," he said. "I owe it to my son to try." As Wesley left Dr. Vasquez's office that day, he realized he was beginning to understand the difference between wanting to change and actually doing the work of transformation. The first was about feeling better about himself. The second was about becoming someone worthy of the love he'd thrown away. The real test would be whether he could sustain that commitment when the work got harder and the progress felt impossibly slow. 2 months after Oliver's birth, Wesley stood outside Mia's apartment building at 6 in the morning, holding a bouquet of white roses and a folder containing signed divorce papers. He hadn't seen his wife since that devastating conversation in the hospital, though the nurses told him she visited Oliver every afternoon while he came in the mornings, a carefully orchestrated schedule that avoided any accidental encounters. The doorman, an elderly man named Giuseppe who had always greeted Wesley warmly during their marriage, looked at him with barely concealed disdain. "She's not receiving visitors, Mr. Moore," Giuseppe said firmly. "I know. I just want to leave these for her. The flowers and the papers she requested through her lawyer." Giuseppe took the items without warmth. "I'll make sure she gets them." As Wesley walked away, he caught sight of Mia through the lobby window, heading toward the elevator with a small bag, probably heading to the hospital for her daily visit with Oliver. She looked thinner than before, tired but determined, moving with the careful deliberation of someone still recovering from trauma. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with appearance, beautiful in her resilience, in her quiet strength, in her ability to rebuild while he was still learning how to exist with his guilt. Wesley drove to Northwestern Memorial, knowing he would miss Oliver's morning feeding but unable to face the NICU after seeing Mia's distant figure. Instead, he found himself in the hospital chapel, staring at the simple cross on the wall and wondering if redemption was actually possible, or just something people told themselves to make unbearable guilt more manageable. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Wesley, this is Vivian Chen. We need to talk. Meet me at the Palmer House bar at 8 p.m. Come alone." Vivian Chen. Wesley's blood ran cold. He knew the name. Everyone in Chicago's business community did. She was a corporate crisis management specialist, the person wealthy families called when scandals threatened to destroy reputations permanently. The fact that she was contacting him could only mean one thing: someone with serious money was moving against him. The Palmer House bar buzzed with its usual evening crowd of tourists and business travelers, but Wesley spotted Vivian immediately. She sat alone at a corner table, a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked black hair and the kind of composed elegance that spoke of Swiss boarding schools and Ivy League law degrees. "Mr. Moore," she said without rising as he approached. "Thank you for coming." Wesley sat down across from her, noting that she'd chosen a table where their conversation couldn't be overheard. "Who sent you? That's not important. What matters is that certain influential people in this city are concerned about your situation." "My situation?" Vivian smiled thinly. "Your very public personal crisis has created complications for several ongoing projects. The Morrison withdrawal was just the beginning. Word is spreading through investment circles that more construction might not be a reliable partner. Wesley felt his chest tighten. What does that have to do with you? I've been retained to offer you an elegant solution. Vivian opened a leather portfolio and slid a document across the table. A position with a development firm in Dubai. Substantial salary, full relocation package, 5-year contract with performance bonuses that would make you quite wealthy. Wesley stared at the numbers on the page. The offer was staggering, more than he'd made in his best year, enough to rebuild his fortune in a city where no one knew his story. In exchange for what? You disappear from Chicago, quietly. Your divorce is finalized, child support arrangements are made through attorneys, and you begin a new life where your personal history won't interfere with business relationships. The offer was seductive in its simplicity. Wesley could leave behind the whispered conversations, the canceled meetings, the slow professional death he was experiencing. In Dubai, he could be successful again, respected again, free from the daily reminder of his failures. What about my son? Generous child support, of course. Video calls, scheduled visits during holidays. Many successful executives manage international co-parenting arrangements. Wesley thought about Oliver, who now weighed 4 pounds and could focus his eyes for short periods. The baby who turned toward Wesley's voice when he read stories, who gripped Wesley's finger with surprising strength during feeding times. I need time to think about this. Vivian's expression suggested she'd expected immediate acceptance. Mr. Moore, opportunities like this don't remain available indefinitely. The people behind this offer have the influence to make your professional life in Chicago quite challenging, if you choose to stay. The threat was delivered with elegant politeness, but it was unmistakably a threat. Wesley understood that powerful people, probably including former business partners who distanced themselves from his scandal, wanted him gone badly enough to pay handsomely for his departure. How long do I have? 1 week. After Vivian left, Wesley sat alone in the bar, staring at the contract that offered him everything he'd thought he wanted. Wealth, prestige, a fresh start. All he had to do was abandon his son and the slow, painful work of becoming someone better. His phone rang. Dr. Vasquez. Wesley, I know it's late, but I wanted to check in. How are you feeling about tomorrow's session? Wesley had been dreading their next appointment. Doctor. Vasquez had planned to explore his relationship with his father, territory Wesley found particularly painful. Actually, something's come up. I might need to cancel. Oh, everything all right? Wesley looked at the contract again, at the numbers that could solve all his immediate problems. I've been offered a job in Dubai. It would mean leaving Chicago. There was a long pause. That's a significant decision. How do you feel about it? It would solve a lot of problems. For whom? The question hung in the air. Wesley thought about Oliver's tiny hand gripping his finger, about the food bank volunteers who'd started calling him by name, about the slow work of learning to be someone worth respecting. It would solve problems for me, he admitted. And what would it cost? Wesley closed his eyes. Everything I've been trying to build. My relationship with my son. The chance to prove I can change. That sounds like a high price. After hanging up, Wesley walked the Chicago streets for hours, passing landmarks of his former life. The restaurant where he'd humiliated Mia. The office building where his reputation was slowly crumbling. The hospital where his son was growing stronger every day. At midnight, he found himself standing outside Mia's apartment building again. The lights in her windows were off, but he imagined her sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, no longer carrying the weight of an unfaithful husband's selfish choices. She was free of him now. Oliver would be fine with child support and occasional visits from a father who lived half a world away. Wesley could disappear into wealth and success, leaving behind only the financial obligations that money could handle. It would be so easy. Wesley pulled out his phone and stared at Vivian Chen's number. All he had to do was send a text accepting the offer, and by next week, he could be on a plane to a new life where his failures were ancient history. His finger hovered over the screen as he stood in the shadow of the life he'd destroyed, facing the choice between running toward comfort and staying to fight for something he wasn't even sure he deserved. The city lights stretched out around him like a constellation of judgment, each one representing someone who knew his story and found him wanting. Wesley closed his phone without sending the message, but he didn't delete Vivian's number either. The choice could wait until morning, when he would have to decide whether the man he was becoming was stronger than the man he had always been. Wesley stood in the NICU at 5:30 in the morning, watching Oliver sleep. At nearly 3 months old, His son had grown strong enough to breathe completely on his own, and was scheduled to go home with Mia in just 2 weeks. The tiny fighter, who had once been connected to more machines than seemed possible, now looked almost like a regular baby, still small, but undeniably alive and thriving. "You're early today," Jennifer, the night nurse, observed softly. "Couldn't sleep." Wesley adjusted the small book in his hands. "Good night, Moon," Oliver's apparent favorite based on how he turned toward Wesley's voice when he read it. Big decision to make. Jennifer had been there through all of Oliver's critical moments, had seen Wesley's transformation from the distracted, guilty man who'd arrived that first night to someone who showed up every day, regardless of his crumbling life outside these walls. "He knows your voice now," she said. "Premature babies form attachments quickly to consistent caregivers. You've been consistent." Consistent. The word felt foreign applied to Wesley's life. For 35 years, he'd been consistently selfish, consistently focused on his own advancement, consistently choosing the path that served his immediate desires. These past 3 months were the longest he'd ever sustained behavior that wasn't primarily about his own benefit. Wesley opened the book and began reading in the soft voice that Oliver seemed to prefer. As he read about the quiet room and the old lady whispering, "Hush," his phone buzzed with a reminder. Meeting with Vivian Chen. 2 hours to deadline. Yesterday had been Wesley's last day at the food bank. Carmen had said goodbye with characteristic directness. "You lasted longer than I expected. Whatever you're wrestling with, I hope you choose right." She'd known somehow that Wesley was facing a choice that would define everything that came after. Dr. Vasquez had called the night before, one final session before Wesley made his decision. "You've spent your whole life running toward things that made you feel successful," she'd said. "Now you have a chance to stay and do the harder work of actually becoming successful as a human being. The question is whether you believe you're capable of that kind of change." Wesley finished reading and gently placed his finger against Oliver's palm. His son's tiny hand closed around it with the automatic grip reflex that had become Wesley's favorite part of each visit. For a moment, they stayed connected, father and son, the relationship Wesley had never imagined could matter more than any business deal. "Mr. Moore?" Dr. Kane appeared beside him, her expression warm but professional. "I wanted to let you know that Oliver will be ready for discharge next Friday. Mrs. Moore has completed all the preparation classes, and her apartment is set up with everything he'll need." "That's wonderful news." "It is. He's exceeded every milestone we hoped for. Your son is a remarkable little fighter." Wesley nodded, though the words felt bittersweet. Oliver's recovery was everything he'd prayed for, but it also meant the end of these morning visits, the end of the one part of his routine that felt unquestionably good and right. "Doctor Kane, can I ask you something?" "Of course. In your experience, do people really change? Fundamentally, I mean. Not just behavior modification, but actual transformation of who they are." Dr. Kane studied him with the careful attention of someone who'd seen families through their worst moments. "I've seen parents rise to challenges I wouldn't have thought possible. I've also seen people who couldn't sustain the effort when it got difficult. The difference usually comes down to whether they're changing for themselves or for someone else." "What do you mean?" "People who change for external validation, to look good, to avoid consequences, rarely maintain it long term. But people who change because they genuinely believe their child deserves better, those transformations tend to stick." Wesley thought about the Dubai offer, still waiting for his response. The easy path that would solve his problems while allowing him to tell himself he was still providing for Oliver financially. "Thank you, Dr. Kane, for everything." At 10 o'clock, Wesley sat across from Vivian Chen at the same table where she'd made her offer a week earlier. She looked expectant, confident, surrounded by the leather portfolio that contained his escape route. "Mr. Moore, I trust you've had time to consider our proposal." Wesley placed a single sheet of paper on the table between them. "I have." Vivian glanced at the document, his handwritten rejection of the Dubai position, and her composure slipped slightly. "I'm afraid I don't understand. This opportunity won't come again." "I know. You're choosing to stay in a city where your reputation is damaged, where your business prospects are limited, where you'll face daily reminders of your personal failures." Wesley thought about Oliver's hand closing around his finger, about Carmen's approval when he'd learned to properly stack food bank donations, about Dr. Vasquez's question about doing things purely because they were right. "I'm choosing to stay where my son will grow up, where I can be present for his life instead of sending checks from another continent." Vivian's expression hardened. "Mr. Moore, I don't think you understand the full scope of what you're rejecting." The people behind this offer have significant influence in Chicago's business community. Staying here may prove uncomfortable. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you of reality. Your presence here creates complications for influential people. If you insist on remaining, those complications will likely find their way back to you. Wesley felt a familiar fear, the old terror of losing status, of professional irrelevance, of financial insecurity. For 35 years, those fears had driven every major decision of his life. But sitting in that restaurant, thinking about his son preparing to go home to a mother who would love him unconditionally, Wesley discovered something unexpected. There were worse things than professional failure. Then I guess I'll deal with those complications as they come. Vivian gathered her materials with the efficient disappointment of someone accustomed to getting her way. This is a mistake, Mr. Moore. You'll regret this choice. Maybe, but I'll regret the alternative more. After she left, Wesley drove to Northwestern Memorial one last time as Oliver's daily visitor. Tomorrow his son would go home with Mia, and Wesley would have to figure out how to be a father from a distance that Mia felt was safe. He found Oliver awake and alert, those dark eyes that looked so much like Mia's focusing on Wesley's face with new clarity. "Hey, little guy," Wesley whispered. "Tomorrow you get to go home. Your mom has everything ready. A nursery with books and toys and everything a growing boy needs." Oliver made a soft sound. Not quite a coo, but close. "I want you to know something," Wesley continued, his voice thick with emotion he'd never allowed himself to feel. "I failed you before you were even born. I failed your mother, who deserves so much better than what I gave her. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the father you deserve." Wesley pulled out a small wrapped package, a children's book he'd bought that morning. The Runaway Bunny, a story about unconditional love and staying connected no matter what. "I know your mom will read to you and she has much better taste in books than I do, but maybe she'll read this one and tell you it came from your dad, who is learning that love means staying even when it's hard." He placed the book in Oliver's bassinet, knowing that Mia would find it when she came for the discharge. As Wesley walked out of the NICU for the last time as a daily visitor, he felt the weight of his choice settling around him like armor. He had chosen the harder path, staying to face the consequences of his actions, building a relationship with his son from whatever distance Mia required, doing the slow work of becoming someone worthy of the title, father. The Dubai offer had represented everything he'd always valued: wealth, status, escape from difficulty. Rejecting it felt like stepping off a cliff, trusting that there might be solid ground below even though he couldn't see it. But as Wesley drove through Chicago's morning traffic, passing the landmarks of his former life, he realized that for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving toward something meaningful rather than running away from something uncomfortable. Oliver would grow up knowing that his father had chosen to stay, to fight for the chance to earn his respect, rather than settling for the easier path of financial obligation from a distance. It wasn't redemption, not yet. Wesley understood that earning his son's respect would be the work of a lifetime, and there was no guarantee he would succeed. But it was a beginning, a foundation, on which he could build something real. The morning sun broke through Chicago's winter clouds as Wesley drove home to his empty penthouse, ready to begin the rest of his life as a man who stayed to face the music, rather than running toward the next easy opportunity. For the first time since that terrible night at Le Bernardin, Wesley Moore was moving in the right direction. 1 year later, the Lincoln Park playground hummed with the familiar sounds of Saturday afternoon: children's laughter, parents calling out warnings about climbing too high, the rhythmic squeak of swings that had seen thousands of small hands grip their chains. Wesley sat on a bench 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a massive oak tree, watching a scene that both warmed and broke his heart. Mia pushed Oliver's stroller along the walking path, stopping occasionally to point out dogs or ducks to her 1-year-old son. Even from this distance, Wesley could see that Oliver had grown into a healthy, alert toddler, his dark hair catching the spring sunlight, his small hands reaching for everything within his grasp. This had become Wesley's Saturday ritual over the past 6 months. He would arrive at the park 20 minutes before Mia's usual visit, positioning himself where he could catch glimpses of his son, without intruding on the peaceful life Mia had built for them both. She had never noticed him, or if she had, she'd chosen not to acknowledge his presence. The legal arrangement was clean and distant. Child support deposited automatically each month, birthday and Christmas gifts sent through attorneys, no direct contact unless medical emergencies required it. Wesley had honored those boundaries religiously, understanding that Mia's peace was more important than his desire for connection. The past year had been the hardest of Wesley's life, but also the most honest. Moore Construction had collapsed 6 months after Wesley rejected the Dubai offer. The promised retaliation from powerful interests had been swift and thorough. Contracts canceled, permits delayed, financing mysteriously withdrawn. Wesley's business partner Richard had dissolved their partnership, taking the viable projects with him and leaving Wesley with crushing debt and a reputation so damaged that no legitimate firm would hire him. Wesley now worked as a project supervisor for a small renovation company on the south side, making barely a third of his former salary. His penthouse had been sold to cover debts, and he now lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Logan Square. The BMW had been replaced by a used Honda Civic that broke down regularly, but got him to work each day. But something unexpected had happened during this professional and financial collapse. Wesley had discovered a capacity for satisfaction he'd never known existed. Working with his hands, solving practical problems, building something tangible rather than shuffling papers and manipulating deals. It felt more real than anything he'd done in his corporate days. His crew, mostly immigrants working to support families back home, had initially viewed him with suspicion, a former rich boy playing at blue-collar work. But Wesley's willingness to take on the hardest jobs and his gradual acquisition of actual skills had earned their grudging respect. "You're not completely useless," Carlos, the crew chief, had told him last month after Wesley had successfully rewired an entire apartment building. For a gringo who used to wear $1,000 suits, it was the closest thing to approval Wesley had received from anyone in months, and it meant more than any business award he'd ever earned. His therapy sessions with Dr. Vasquez continued weekly, though he now paid from his modest savings rather than expensive insurance. The work had grown deeper, more painful but also more transformative. Wesley was learning the difference between guilt and shame, between regret and genuine remorse, between wanting to be forgiven and earning the right to live with his choices. "You're becoming someone your son could respect," Dr. Vasquez had told him recently. "That doesn't guarantee he will respect you, but it makes it possible." The food bank work had continued as well, though Wesley now volunteered during evening hours to accommodate his construction schedule. Carmen had been promoted to regional coordinator, but she still worked his shifts when possible. "You stuck around," she'd observed 6 months ago. "That says something." "What does it say?" "That maybe you actually meant it when you said you wanted to change." Now watching Mia settle on a park bench to feed Oliver a snack, Wesley felt the familiar mixture of love and loss that had become his constant companion. His son was growing up beautiful and healthy, clearly adored by a mother who had rebuilt her life with remarkable strength. But Wesley remained a stranger to his own child, a monthly deposit, and an occasional gift, rather than a presence in Oliver's daily world. As if sensing his thoughts, Mia looked up from Oliver's stroller and scanned the park. Wesley held his breath, ready to leave if she spotted him, but her gaze passed over his hiding spot without pause. She was more relaxed than he'd seen her in the hospital, her face peaceful in a way that reminded him of their early years together. She had healed. She had moved on. She was thriving without him. Wesley felt tears he didn't try to hide streaming down his face, not tears of self-pity, but of profound gratitude. Mia was free. Oliver was loved. The family Wesley had nearly destroyed through his selfishness was whole again, just without him in it. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, his brother. "Mom's birthday next weekend. You coming home?" Wesley had been making the trip to Portland every few months, reconnecting with family he'd neglected during his years of chasing success. His parents, now in their 70s, had welcomed him back with the kind of unconditional love that Wesley was only beginning to understand. "Yes, I'll be there," he texted back. As Wesley prepared to leave the park, he saw something that stopped him cold. A woman with auburn hair approached Mia's bench. Clara, looking perfectly groomed as always, but somehow diminished. She wore expensive clothes and carried a designer handbag, but there was something desperate in her posture as she spoke to Mia. From his distance, Wesley couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read body language. Clara was animated, gesturing frequently, while Mia remained seated and composed. After several minutes, Mia shook her head decisively and turned her attention back to Oliver. Clara stood there for a moment longer, clearly dismissed before walking away with the stiff dignity of someone who had just been definitively rejected. Wesley wondered what Clara had wanted. Reconciliation, perhaps, or some kind of closure. Maybe she had finally realized what she'd actually won in their sordid affair. A man so fundamentally flawed that destroying his family had been easy, and so weak that keeping him had proved impossible. The rumors reached Wesley occasionally through Chicago's interconnected social networks. Clara had moved through several relationships since their breakup, each one following a similar pattern: intense involvement with married men who ultimately chose their families over her. She had started a consulting business that was struggling, perhaps because her reputation for home-wrecking had made her toxic to family-oriented companies. Clara had gotten exactly what she deserved: the hollow victory of proving she could steal someone else's husband, only to discover that a man willing to abandon his family wasn't worth keeping. As Wesley walked to his car, he passed close enough to the bench where Mia sat with Oliver to hear his son's voice for the first time in months. "Mama, duck!" Oliver pointed excitedly at the pond where several mallards paddled in lazy circles. "Yes, baby, those are ducks," Mia replied, her voice filled with the patient love that had once encompassed Wesley as well. Oliver clapped his small hands together, delighted by the simple pleasure of watching waterfowl. He was perfect, healthy, happy, curious about the world around him. Everything Wesley had hoped for during those terrifying days in the NICU. Wesley climbed into his Honda and sat for a moment, watching through the windshield as Mia packed up their things and prepared to head home. Home to an apartment Wesley had never seen, filled with toys and books and the accumulated treasures of a child's first year of life. As they disappeared down the walking path, Wesley finally understood what Dr. Vasquez had been trying to teach him about the difference between redemption and justice. Justice was Oliver growing up healthy and loved. Justice was Mia finding peace after the trauma Wesley had caused. Justice was Clara discovering that winning through manipulation left her with nothing worth having. Redemption was something else entirely: the long, difficult work of becoming someone worthy of the air he breathed, regardless of whether anyone ever acknowledged that transformation. Wesley drove home to his small apartment, where he would spend the evening reading construction manuals and preparing for another week of honest work with his hands. It wasn't the life he'd planned, wasn't the success story he'd once imagined for himself, but as he caught one last glimpse of his son in the rearview mirror, a healthy boy pointing at clouds while his mother pushed his stroller toward their future, Wesley realized he was building something more valuable than any skyscraper he'd ever constructed. He was building a man his son might someday choose to know. That would have to be enough. A story about choices and consequences. This is a story about how our decisions echo through time, affecting not only our own lives, but the lives of those we love. Wesley Moore chose instant gratification over responsibility, shallow passion over true love, and ego over family. The consequences of these choices spread like ripples in a pond, touching every person in his life in ways he never imagined. But this is also a story about the possibility of real change, not the quick, glamorous transformation of movies, but the slow, painful, and uncertain transformation that happens when someone finally decides to face the truth about themselves. Wesley wasn't forgiven. He didn't win back his family. He didn't become wealthy or respected again. He simply became someone better, day by day, choice by choice, with no guarantees that anyone would ever notice or care. Mia found her strength in quiet dignity, refusing to be defined by the betrayal she suffered. Clara discovered that winning through manipulation leaves only ashes in your hands. And Oliver grew up surrounded by the unconditional love of a mother who transformed pain into protection. The question that remains is, when you face the choice between what is easy and what is right, which path do you choose? And are you willing to live with the consequences of that choice, whatever they may be, for the rest of your life? I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.